The first one, as far-fetched as it sounds, is alien abduction, and it's not very likely because of the fact that many people do not believe in aliens, and it's not scientifically proven that they exist. There's also people who will say, well, there was no UFO sightings around the area, there were no crop circles around the area, and there's nothing really leading up to believing that it could have been an alien abduction anyway. The second theory is that Brandon was hit by a car, and this theory makes sense as to why the dog would have jumped into the river and then back out and then walked toward a road and just sat down and lost his scent. If Brandon was hit by a car, then that would have most likely left some sort of blood or scuff on the road or something. So that's one reason why that most likely is not the case. And it was also unlikely because if Brandon had seen a car coming down a road, he most likely would have assumed it was his dad who was out driving looking for him. Another reason why it would be unlikely is if he got hit by a car, it would most likely be a hit and run. So why would his body be nowhere to be found, or like he wouldn't have left a blood trail or some sort of clue where he had gone. If he was hit by a car, he would have been badly injured and he wouldn't have been able to go far. The fourth theory is that Brandon had fallen into some sort of illegal trap or fallen into some sort of old well on a farm, because it was around a lot of farm area, or that he was met by a random killer or someone he knew who had followed him from the party. The only reason why this is very unlikely that it would have been a murder is because he was in a very remote farmland in Minnesota, and it was the middle of the night, and he had walked so far, he would have heard someone that close to him. So it was also likely because he was on private land at 3 a.m. and people seeing someone on their property at 3 a.m. who's talking and just like walking around, they probably sound very suspicious, and they probably believe that someone is trying to rob them or something like that. Sorry. So if it was someone who was familiar, who had followed him from the party, it could be likely because they would have known the way that Brandon would have taken home. And if they had been following him, they would have seen him get stuck in the ditch and would have seen him start walking and walk through a field to where he thought was Lind. The next theory is that Brandon perished in some type of accident. So this is very likely because he was disoriented, he was confused, he's frustrated. It was 3 a.m. and he was just trying to get home. And he was 25 miles away from where he thought he was, and he had walked very far away from his car. And if he had fallen into the river, he had probably gotten very cold. It can't be warm in the middle of the night in Minnesota, especially when you're walking that far and it's 3 a.m. He abandoned the vehicle too and started walking, so he was probably very tired. So the fact that he was on the phone with his dad and then he swore and then the line went dead, that has to mean some sort of accident had happened. This is also a very unlikely theory because there's not really an obstacle around the area that he would have come across. There's no sinkholes, there's nothing beside that river, and all the old farm wells were actually capped off. It's also unlikely because if he had gotten into an accident, he was on farmland this whole time. This is a very large farming area. The farmers most likely would have gone out and checked their property once they heard about this news that this 19-year-old had gone missing. And so someone would have been most likely to find him by then. This is still a likely theory though, because the area does have a lot of swamps and bogs and caves, and there's a lot of 6-foot tall grasslands, there's wooded areas, and there's ponds everywhere. So he could have fallen into one of these areas and just gotten stuck there. It's also likely because he could have fallen into that water and then got into one of these areas and ended up passing away from hypothermia. So my theory very closely relates to the last one, is that Brandon had perished in some sort of accident. Now, my theory is that he was walking like he was, and he had fallen into the river and ended up getting out, and ended up trying to walk through these tall grasslands and some sort of thing like that, and had actually fallen into a swamp or a bog. Now, if you have ever been in a bog, it's normally very, very cold because of the water temperature being from, or the water coming from a glacier that's normally underneath the bog. So that water is very, very cold. And in the middle of the night, if he was to fall into that bog, he would most likely freeze or die of hypothermia. And it's actually a very, very likely possibility, especially since if he had fallen in, the mud would have probably taken him under, and he could have drowned that way. So that is my theory, is that that's what happened, and that's why his dad heard that slipping sound and him cussing and then the line going dead. Now, the thing about his phone still working is that just because the call goes through, that doesn't necessarily mean that the phone is active. It just means that the cell tower was able to get that call through. Another part of my theory is that Brandon may have had a little more to drink than his friends thought he did, or his friends had seen him drink, and that could have also led to him not being able to entirely see where the bog was and why he would have fallen into it, especially in the middle of the night. So that's my theory. So Brandon was last seen on May 14th, 2008 as a 19-year-old. He was last seen in Canby, Minnesota. His vehicle was a green Chevy Lumina, and it was abandoned in Taunton, Minnesota. His description: he's Caucasian, 5'5", 125 pounds, brown hair, blue eyes, and he was last seen wearing baggy blue jeans, a blue striped polo shirt, a black hoodie, white Minnesota Twins baseball cap, glasses, a sterling silver chain. He had his cell phone, wallet with ID, keys, and white sneakers on. If you have any information of Brandon or any idea of what may have happened to him, please contact the Pine County Sheriff's Office. Thank you.